We can start in three, two, one. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cultivating Kingdom Culture. This is Andrew Tao. And today I actually have two very special guests with me. I have Kasifu Tim or Kasifu Chajong and then Sifu Andrew. These are the two pastors at Cornerstone Alliance Church in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. And they are the two pastors at the local church I'm currently attending. So, Kasifu Tim or Kasifu Chajong, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself, your family, how long you've been serving, and where you graduated from, and then Sifu Andrew after.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So, like Andrew said, my name is Kusifu Tim or Kusifu Chanjong. I am the lead pastor at the Cornerstone Alliance Church in Two Rivers, Wisconsin here. I've been married for, oh my goodness, 12 years, going on 13 years now. We have two boys, Gideon, who's 7, and Tobiah, who just turned 1 year. I did my undergrad at Crown College in Minnesota in youth ministry, and then I did my MDiv at Alliance Theological Seminary in Nyack, New York, in church development. And I've been serving at Cornerstone Life Church now, going on 7 years. Yeah, 7 years already. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
All right, guys. My name is Andrew Chang. I just got installed as a youth pastor just last year, so I'm pretty new into the ministry. So I'm still learning to, not a lot of experience, but it's been a great experience. God has been teaching me a lot. I got recently married as well last year, so it's been married about 6 months now. And also, God blessed us with a child as well. So my wife is expecting sometime in July, and we're expecting a baby girl. So super duper excited. I graduated to Coa Falls College. Me and Andrew or AT went to school together, so it's an honor to be on the podcast to support him and help him out. But yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. For those of you who don't personally know them, if you want to reach out to them, feel free to reach out. They have a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight to give. So with that, I'll give a quick recap of the introduction episode. So in the introduction episode, I talked about how the local church, essentially the goal or the purpose is to make disciples who make disciples. That's what I see Jesus, what he established, the model he set for us. And with that, I do see that what Charles Spurgeon has said is true. He said that if it takes a carnival to bring people to church, it's going to keep taking a carnival to keep them in the church. And I think this is something that is so true, especially when it comes to the local church. When I think about Jesus, the cost of discipleship, he laid it straight out. And you have to consider the cost before you follow Christ. But I think sometimes it's very easy to be more focused on the growth or getting people in the church. It's all about getting numbers in the church. But then if people are leaving and not growing, they're not leaving and maturing, but they're just showing up. I think we have to reevaluate how we are doing church. So the goal is not just, hey, how many people can I get to show up to church, but how many people can join the church and leave mature, and how can they go out and bring more people in? And the process keeps going. So with that, last episode, I shared that quote from Charles Spurgeon. If it takes a carnival to bring people to church, it'll keep taking a carnival to keep them in the church. So in the Hmong context, I briefly touched on it about how the carnival might look like advertising, funerals, or weddings, or any sort of cultural perks that we advertise over the gospel. So with that, for Sifu Chajong and Sifu Andrew, is that something that you've actually seen to be true in the Hmong church, or is it just something that I'm wrongly observing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question and a great topic for us to talk about. Definitely one that is definitely necessary, especially in our context. And I do agree with you, Andrew, that the whole carnival issue, and the way that I interpret that question is the way that a good friend of mine interpreted it. His name is Dan Tao, passed away a couple years ago. He said it this way. He said, "What you win them with is what you win them to," right? So whether it's the worship team or fog lights or games, that's whatever you use to win, quote unquote, win people over to Christ is what you win them to. And so, being in our context, the Hmong church, in this point in history, yeah, the carnival is definitely culture, right? Culture, and don't get me wrong, like I love being Hmong. I love the Hmong culture, and I think there's many great things about the Hmong culture. I think God created us Hmong for a reason, and so like don't get me wrong, there's many great things about it, but at the same time, I think there are other things that might not be as biblical. And so what I mean by that is in the way that culture takes form in our churches, right? It's like what you said, funerals, right? Funerals or weddings or whether it's a 中诺 mall or some type of a gathering, and again, don't get me wrong, some of those things aren't necessarily bad, right? The Hmong church, I think one thing that the Hmong church does well is the community part, very communal, very collective. Hey, like what does everybody else want to do? So I think those things are good, but I think those things can become idols too, and the word that I like to use is a word that a good friend of mine uses, right? Chakong or Kusikui Billy. He uses this term sacred cows. And so in the Hmong context, one of the sacred cows is definitely funerals, right? So how does that look like? Hey, come to our church so that we can help you with funerals. So just within that example, right, you don't hear anything about the gospel. Like, hey, you're a sinner. You need Jesus. He died for our sins, right? It's just, hey, come to church and we'll help you with funerals. And unfortunately, some people have bought into that, right? Yeah, they come to church, they become church members, take the membership class, they come and they give their weekly tithes, and for what? For in hopes of, hey, the church is going to help me when I need help. It's specifically funerals. And so in my years of experience at the Cornerstone Life Church, yeah, I have experienced many times where people, that's all they come for is, hey, when my family has a funeral, I expect the church to help me, right? And so, yeah, it's been a very sensitive topic, and obviously we're not going to be able to talk about it too much in depth with the time that we've been given, but yeah, I have definitely experienced it. So,
Any thoughts, CB Andrew?
I mean, just like with Tim, I mean, for me personally, I've definitely seen it, not just at my church or our church, but many churches I've been to. But if Hmong churches specifically, yeah, I mean, we just did a membership kind of renewal. And so that was pretty big. And the purpose of doing that membership renewal was because of this kind of idea of being a member, you get perks. Not necessarily being a member, you're a part of the body of Christ. It's more about having the perks. And so I think we as a GA board, we talked about really finding the true members of the church, the people who desire this community, this kingdom community that you've been talking about, to actually be the church. And so, yeah, I've definitely seen it in the Hmong churches, but even like, not just like ethnicity wise, but like even with the youths. I mean, it's something that I'm struggling with, I'm dealing with, because it's like when you're doing ministry, you want to speak to the needs of the people, right? And so you want to present things to them to get them to come, but getting them to stay is the harder part.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we trust in God to really work in their lives. But it is definitely hard trying to find the fine line of, where do we do things to speak to the needs of these people versus when we're just presenting to them something that is not the gospel. and confusing them about what the church actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been hard in the Hmong churches, but also like just dealing with younger people as well. It's something that I feel like a lot of youth pastors are gonna have to go through because this
Mm-hmm.
generation it's different, or they're different. But yeah, I've seen it in the Hmong churches, and not just in just Hmong people, but just like in people in general, and especially with youth ministry. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a struggle for me. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing on that. I think it's really true that there is that conflict there, and I think the hard part about ministry is you have the visible church and the invisible church. You can't say, oh, you're a Christian, you're not a Christian. You don't know who is who, um, but you give benefit of the doubt and you trust that God will allow the true Christians to persevere and work together and push on. But it really is hard, though. I mean, there's no easy way to just pick and plug and be like, you're a Christian, you're not, separate. So that's the difficulty of ministry. And I'm sure that both of you have experienced how hard that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
But with that, I know that the both of you have been working on membership. So with the new membership, I guess, policy, if that's the right saying, or the new membership standard, or the clearer communication of what it means to be a member, have you experienced tension between, in the past, well, isn't this what church meant? Oh, in the past, isn't this what it meant to be in the church? What it meant to be a member? Um, being a member to what we thought church was. How come now you're changing that? Is that something that you experienced in this new transition?
Oh yeah, definitely. Kind of like what Sophie Andrew said, we just held a membership class during service, and prior to that, I was getting phone calls and messages, and people were they were so concerned about their families, specifically their adult children, like, well, like, oh, Sifu, if you and the elders are doing this, what about my daughter who's in a different state, like a different city, who hasn't come to our church in years, but is a quote unquote member. And so, yeah, definitely, I have come across those tensions, and I think Sifu Andrew kind of, he hit the nail on the head, talking about this whole membership thing. I think the people have ascribed to something else, and I like the words that he used. He used the word perks, right? And I used perks, and I use the word club, right? Where they ascribe to what they think a quote unquote church is, but they treat it like a club with perks, like, hey, if I sign this form and I contribute my tithes, then church is gonna help me in this area of need. And so I think that's the hard part, as a spiritual leader. It's like, how do you discern, like, how do I discern if this person's really a born again Christian, or they're just coming to be a member to keep their membership, to keep their quote unquote perks, And so, yeah, I think that's the hard part, just learning to discern.
Yeah, he's just, I've only heard the stories he shared with me, like members calling him.
Mhm.
Yeah, members calling him and super worried, like, because like we're doing this membership, like, do we have to be there? Can we make it up? And all that stuff. It's just a worry about, but I do believe that, as like Hmong people, it's like we want to belong somewhere. And so
Mhm.
for a lot of them, Cornerstone was a place that they felt like they belonged. And the funny thing is, like, they're not even present, but because they have their membership, it's kind of like their plug. Like, okay, like, if anything happens to me and my family, like, I'm plugged into a community, they're going to stand by me. And so, at least from his concerns from the members that he told me, like, I just sounded like that was the main concern. It's like, will you guys be there for me if something happens?
Mm.
And so, I don't think that that's a a bad thing that they worry about that. But I think we must not compromise what it means to be the church.
Mm,
And part of being the church is you have to be present, right?
mm,
When you commit to the church, you don't just commit to a building, you commit to people. And so we just want to teach the members that that's really what it means to be a member. Obviously, like if someone in our church who's been close with us has been like struggling, or something went wrong with their family and they didn't come to our membership thing, obviously we'd help them out, because it's like, you're there, you're present, you're truly a member. And when one part of the body hurts, the other hurts, so we will stand with you.
mhm.
And so we just wanted to teach our members that idea. But there was some tension. I think there was some pushback too. But I mean, this is the process of teaching people what the church is. Like, these are things we have to go through. If we want to be serious about being the church, we got to do these things.
Mm. Yeah, and I think with that, because we've maybe in the past advertised or preached, we preached something other than the gospel or something other than what it means to be a biblical church. When people became members, they became a member to what that was rather than to what a biblical church was. And now that the both of you are making that transition, there is a lot of tension, but that tension is not necessarily bad. I think it's actually a good thing because without the tension, no growth can happen. So I think you're both handling it well. But with that transitioning happening, and with people being one to a different idea of what church meant, have you seen how difficult it has made ministry? Like, for example, when it comes to doing biblical ministry, when it comes to fellowship, when it comes to community, when it comes to discipleship, because people have been won to the wrong idea of what it means to be a church, have you experienced difficulties in that area at all?
You want to take that one first? Want me to go first?
I definitely have seen the struggle in like almost like every aspect of ministry. Like, just because in the Hmong churches, especially discipleship, right? It's like you want to teach people how to disciple, especially like Jalana, but it's something that isn't necessarily, or at least discipleship in the way that Jesus did it. It's not something that they, I don't want to say care about, but it's just not something that they think about. And so I think the way they disciple people is a lot different than how Jesus did it. But it's just because of their background. They're a lot tougher on you. Their kind of way of discipleship is like throwing you in there and like having you figure it out. And they're kind of like not necessarily lecturing you, but sometimes they lecture you the things you did wrong, the things you should have done. And that's kind of like their way of helping someone learn. And so definitely in discipleship, I see where it affects that. But in many aspects as well. And this isn't just like Jalao, it's with younger people too. Because I know, like you and I, we grew up in the church. We saw church this way. And so a lot of our peers saw it that way too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, we were discipled growing up as well. Not like officially discipled, but we had older brothers who walked with us and who taught us. And so, I mean, some of our peers, I think for them, they didn't catch that idea of what our older brothers were doing. And so even now in our church, it's a struggle to have our older ones disciple our younger ones, just because it's either something that they didn't catch or something that they didn't really experience as much. And so this carnival idea of going to church, I think for us, the the thing presented was, if you come to church, you're gonna have a really great community that loves each other, and not necessarily fellowships, but socializes.
Mm.
And so I think as we grow up, though, like, being youth, it's good, but when you're a single adult, you begin to realize that, man, dude, like, this is good, but um, there needs to be something more.
Mm.
And I think that's something that at least you and I realized, and especially coming back from college, that's where it hit us the most. Like,
Mm.
man, there has to be something more. And I think, like, the idea or the fact that we grew up in like a church context where we were so communal, and like community was like the focus, it was a good start to help us understanding the church. But I think the problem that happened was it kind of stopped there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, this is a community, this is what it means to be a family, but what does it mean to be a family of Jesus? And that's where we struggled, and that's where I feel like a lot of our peers, they grew up, and the reason why some of them don't come back to the church is because they found this community aspect somewhere else in this
Mm-hmm.
world. And so I mean, it's hard. Like, I'm not blaming our church, because we're growing, we're developing, and we're the Hmong church, we're still new into this Christianity thing, and so I don't blame anyone. But the carnival idea, it definitely has affected at least our church in that way. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Sifri Andrew said. I don't want to, like bash on our older folk. I do want to honor them and appreciate all the stuff that Jalal, have done for us. Specifically in our church. And
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that discipleship is always happening. It just depends what kind of disciples you want to make, right? Whether it's biblical disciples or cultural disciples or disciples of this world, right? And so I think that's a good reflection question for us. And just observing our context at Cornerstone, it's kind of like what Sifri Andrew said, Jalal, they didn't have anybody to disciple them. Their philosophy was, hey, I'm going to throw you in there, you either sink or swim, right? And there was probably nobody discipling them either. That was their method, trial and error, right? And so I do want to honor and appreciate those who've gone before us, but at the same time, there has to be something more, something deeper. And with the whole carnival idea, specifically with funerals, right? For me, I see funerals as a symptom of something much deeper. And I think the root issue is lack of discipleship or lack of biblical discipleship, right? And so what I mean by that is, just using funerals as an example, for those that don't know the Hmong context or not familiar with it, right? Hmong funerals used to be like a week long, right? A week long, the whole community was invited, and they would celebrate a week long. And so now, after coming to the States, they shorten it, right? Quote unquote, shorten it to 3 days now, right? So, you got your Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And so I guess for those who are not familiar with our context, that might seem long, right? But to the elderly, that was a compromise, right? Like, yeah, 7 days to 3 days, right? And then from the young people, it's kind of like, well, 3 days is too long, right? We want you guys to do 1 day. So they want to shorten it up even more. And so I think just being a spiritual leader, like, you got to discern and try to understand both contexts. Why do the OGs or Jalal, why do they want to do things this way, right? And then for the younger ones, why do we want to do it that way? And so just trying to compromise, trying to find common grounds, putting each other's preferences above each other. So for me, funerals are just a symptom of something much, much deeper. And for me, it's just where we're lacking what it means to truly make biblical disciples, because we make disciples of culture, and that's how it's taken its form, is funerals or weddings or whatnot. So yeah, it's definitely been a lot of tension in our context, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I definitely agree with the both of you. I think, in general, the experience that the both of you have had at Cornerstone, it's not the same exact experience someone may have somewhere else, but I think it's similar. Um, I think everyone in a Hmong local church kind of have an understanding of the tension, the struggles of the carnival. And it may sound like we've been complaining a lot, but transitioning questions, I want to ask. Um, Not everything in Hmong culture is bad or hostile to the gospel. So, what advice would you give to someone who's currently struggling in the midst of that tension? Someone who's thinking, is it worth it to stay? Is it worth it to be a part of a Hmong local church? What advice would you give to them or encouragement?
Yeah, I would give a couple. First one, just gotta be patient. You gotta be patient. I know that it's much easier said than done, right? But you just gotta be patient and try to understand why the elderly believe that. Why do they hold so firmly to those convictions, right? It's because funerals are so important to them. Culture is so important to them. And so just trying to be patient and understand that, hey, we might be Hmong, but we grew up in America, right? They're Hmong, right? They grew up in Southeast Asia. And so just try to be patient. And then secondly, perspective, right? They have a perspective, you have a perspective. So try to see things from their side, you know? And then ultimately, we want to see things from God's perspective, because, He is the perspective, right? And so just try to gain more understanding, try to get more context to why people behave or why they believe a certain thing.
Yeah. Um, I would echo everything Fitzim was saying. Definitely be patient. And, like being a young guy wanting to go into ministry, I mean, I've experienced all of that, not bitterness towards the Hmong church, but I've experienced a lot of the, man, why are we like this? This is not the church. And then wanting to go in, wanting to change everything. But as you spend time with these people, you begin to love them. You begin to see why they do the things they do. It may not be the things that you prefer, but you begin to see, wow, these people, they just need the gospel. They just need someone to show them what is the true gospel. And so I think spending time with the Hmong people, even like for me, I'm still a young guy. I'm still trying to understand the Hmong people. I think one thing God has definitely done or taught me was to be patient and to get to know these people. And like I don't feel a necessarily a burden to be or to speak to the Hmong people because I'm Hmong. But when you just spend time with these people, you just begin to see their hearts. Like the way we see the gospel, it may be different because like we went to school, we learned all these things, like we know all these technical terms. But when you get to talk to Jalao and you get to hear their stories and their testimony, like you just see that it's not that they don't understand the gospel, they do, but they just have a different approach to doing things. And it's their culture that really affects the way they do the things that they do. And so I think at least encouragement to the guys who want to leave, who just want to dip the Hmong churches, is to be patient. Because if I'm being honest with you, you're probably going to experience this anywhere else you go. In any other church you go to, you're going to experience something where you're going to be like, oh man, this church is not like the biblical church. But the reality is, like, no church is perfect. And so you're going to have to learn how to be patient, to be gracious, because ultimately, I mean, Jesus was gracious and patient with us, right? God is patient with us every single day. And I think for ministers, young ministers, when we step into ministry, we have to be patient. We have to be gracious. We have to get to know the people who God is calling us to serve. And I feel like if we're not willing to do that, then maybe we should take a step back from ministry. Because ultimately, that's what Jesus did, right? The reason why he was so good at disciple making is because he was with the people, he got to know them, and he knew their needs, and so he spoke to them. And in the same way, for young ministers out there, I mean, I know I'm still young and I'm still learning. So, like, I don't know, just be patient. Be patient with the church you're at. I think I was reading an article on Jared Wilson that really touched my heart because I was reading this article when I was having these doubts with the Hmong church and especially with our church. And the article is titled, When You Can't Love the Church You're At, when you can't love the church you desire, love the church you're with. And so that article was more about the COVID churches and people wanting to leave because people were doing things. The way they're dealing with COVID wasn't the way they wanted to deal with COVID. And he was just talking about how, at the church we're at, it may not be the church we desire, and it may not be the church that we want it to be. But the reality is, like, God, especially ministers, calls us to go to these places and to love on these people and to hopefully teach these people what the church is. And my encouragement to you is to keep trying. And I'm usually a fighter, so I don't really give up until I've done the very last thing I can. And until you've done the very, last thing that you can, and if you're at a church and you're trying so hard to do all these things, and if you're being patient and gracious, and you're really trying to get to know the people, but the church really isn't moving or really isn't allowing you to change it, then I would say, maybe you can think about leaving. But as of right now, like, be patient. Really trust in God, the Holy Spirit, to lead you in your ministry, because ultimately we can't be doing this without him. And so that's just my advice to young ministers out there. I mean, I'm giving this advice because it's something I'm going through right now, like learning to be patient, to get to know the people, and getting and understanding understanding why he was so good at ministering, at disciple making. And so I give this advice because it's something I'm trying to preach to myself every day too. And so, yeah, that's at least the advice I have.
Yeah. Sorry if I can chime in again. I know it's super cliche, but it really goes back to that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that was something that early on in my ministry that the Holy Spirit really had to convict me. Because, theology-wise, I guess I would identify with the reformers, right? I'm reformed in my theology, but when it comes to practice, I don't know if that's the best way, because what I mean by that is the way that it came out in my preaching. I sounded very angry, and I really like the term that Pastor Bruce Yang, or Sifu Bruce Yang, coined it, angry reformers. Like, I was just angry all the time, and if I were to use the illustration as a under shepherd, shepherding his sheep, and you're always hitting the sheep, right? You're always hitting the sheep over the head. Every time they go astray, every time they do something wrong, they get in a ditch, they get dirty, and you're just hitting them. That sheep is going to be scared to come to you. You're supposed to, like, bind its wounds up and heal it, but it's going to be scared if you just hit it over the head all the time. And that's what I was doing with my preaching, just hitting the congregants over the head with the Bible. Like, you guys need to do this. You guys need to do this, right? And so the Lord really convicted me of that. And yeah, like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's just like an encouragement to my brothers, especially the young reformers. Just again, take that quote to heart. And I would even add that biblical knowledge does not always translate to spiritual maturity. And so, yeah, man, totally agree with what Sifu Andrew said too. Yeah, be patient. Love the people. Really shepherd them well. Love them. Do life with them. Jesus was the master at relational ministry. You can preach all you want. Your theology could be great, but people are going to be like, "Who is this guy? He never does life with us. You know, we don't know him." And so, yeah, really do life with your people. Really, really love on them. Be gracious, be patient. And understand the perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that advice. I think there's a lot of really good insight that the both of you gave there. Um, and hopefully it does help a lot of our young people who are currently struggling with the Hmong local church and how they've been hurt, how they've been disappointed, a lot of those negative thoughts and emotions. But with that, I do want to press in just a little bit deeper on this question. I think as us young people, we are more educated than those who've come before us, who brought us to where we are. And I think with that, there comes a sense of ego and pride. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, your perspective of church is unbiblical. Your perspective is tainted. I think a lot of times we don't realize that our best thoughts are still tainted. Our best theology is still tainted. So with that, um, how important is it to be humble when it comes to doing church? Understanding that, okay, maybe you're seeing something that I'm actually not seeing. Maybe, hey, God to Lona, maybe you actually understand something about following Christ better than I do. Because I'm at the end of the day, I'm a sinful man who's been redeemed. My thoughts are sin runs deeper than I ever thought it did, but grace runs deeper than that. Grace abounds deeper than that. So how do I better understand the gospel by seeing it from your perspective? How important is it to have that humility when it comes to young people working with older people or in the Hmong local church?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
Yeah. For me, I think humility is so important. I think it's one of the most important, if not the most important attribute in any believer. And it's definitely one that I look for when discipling somebody, mentoring somebody is, hey, is this person humble? Right? And the illustration that comes to my mind is a potter working with clay, right? You can't work with clay that's hard, right? You can only mold and work with clay that's, that's moldable, that's soft. And that's, for me, that's what humility brings to mind, is somebody who is soft, somebody who's teachable, somebody who, even when it comes to theology, hey, I could be wrong, right? My perspective, my understanding of theology might be wrong. You know, I might be thinking a certain way about the Lord, and I could be wrong, right? And so just having that in the back of your mind, not only in the back of your mind, but also character-wise, like humility is so important. Yeah, it's one thing that I look forward to mentoring, teaching somebody. When you're not humble, it's just way too hard to work with, way too hard to teach, coach even, right? Because it's like that saying, you can't fill a cup that thinks it's already full, right? And that person has to empty their cup before you can really pour into them. And that takes a lot of humility. And so for me, humility is key. That's why whenever we approach these tensions, these differences, especially in the Hmong church in our context, especially being a younger person, right, working with the older generations, just got to be humble. right? Just got to be humble, take the time to really try to understand their perspective, right? Because some of them are just, they're so stuck in their ways, just to be honest. The elderly folk, they're just so stuck in their ways, and we, the younger ones, right, we have more access to whether it's education or books or resources that will help us to understand not just their perspective, but also our perspective too. And so that's going to take a lot of humility, right? A lot of humility to be, hey, I could be wrong, you could be right, right? Let's work this thing out together, right? So it's so important.
Yeah, I think humility is so key to being a pastor, a leader. A quote that just stays really close to me when I think about leadership is the best leaders are the greatest servants. And we see this example in Jesus, right? I think about Philippians chapter 2 when he humbles himself to come down to be like us, walking in obedience to the cross to the point of even death. And that is the greatest example of humility and leadership and servanthood. And if we, as pastors and as ministers, I mean, that's pretty hard to live up to, right? That humility, that level of humility, but that's what we're called to do. And especially as pastors, something that I tell my leaders all the time, and I tell everyone, like I tell my brothers, even I tell myself is, you got to learn how to take the L sometimes. And, as guys, like, we don't want to lose. We want to win. We always want to win, especially like when we're in arguments with our wife or our significant other, or just even with a brother. Like, we always want to win. And so something that, God had really taught me at Tekoa, or God really humbled me. Because I went into Tekoa thinking I knew a lot of things, thinking that, I was gonna come back to the church and teach people all these things. But what I really left, when I left Tekoa, I was just humbled, so humbled by God, because I knew that it was God really teaching me that, dude, when you're in the ministry, it's not going to be easy, man. And you think you're going to go in and change all these things because you know so much? Like, it's not going to happen like that. This is what you need to learn. And so God really humbled me. And so humility is so big in ministry. And if you are not humble, then man, ministry is going to be hard. Why? I mean, first of all, it's going to be hard working with people, but most importantly, it's going to be hard because you won't be able to hear from God because you always want your way. And so God won't be able to press on your heart. He won't be able to teach you things. And so when you're humble, when you're prideful, it's hard to hear from God because you think about your way being the best way. And so humility is such a important aspect in being a leader, a pastor, being a Christian, because our Lord and Savior, he walked in humility. And so because he walked in humility and he showed us the greatest example of it, we too must try to follow in that example in our leadership, in our pastoring abilities. And so I think it's so important. And being a young guy, going to the church, like, I know what it's like. I know the feelings you get when you come back to the church thinking you're going to change the world. But man, I just hope and pray that we really reflect on ourselves before stepping into ministry and allow God to humble our hearts. Because if we're not humble, man, dude, God is going to wreck us really, really bad. And so, it was a good feeling. God wrecking me it hurt so bad, but it felt so good at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so important. And I hope and pray that the young pastors or ministers going to step into ministry, hopefully we really reflect on ourselves, especially going to the Hmong churches and working with Jalana. It's going to be hard working with them, but like I was saying, if you really want to speak to them, if you really want to preach the gospel to them, try to model what Jesus did for us. Try to model that to them and to show them this is the gospel, to teach them. And, they're going to push back. It's not going to be a quick 1 month thing or even a year thing. It might take years. But what matters the most is, are you modeling Jesus to them? And if you're not, then you really need to look at yourself. And if you are, then that's a great way of teaching and working with them. And I would even say discipling them to see what the gospel really is. And hopefully it teaches them to also exemplify that, so that they let down their walls to really hear you out and to hear the changes that you want to make in the church. So yeah, humility is a big thing, but it's not something you can teach someone.
Yeah.
It has to be something God does. So
That's good. Yeah, I'm just reminded, as you guys are sharing that, I'm reminded of one of the last things that Jesus does for his disciples as he's finishing up his discipleship or disciple-making process with them, is he washes their feet. And what's really important that he says to them is he's doing this so that they would do likewise. And I think he's modeling for them the principle that if you actually are mature in your faith, if you actually know what it means to follow me, then you'll be at the bottom. Because you're at the bottom, you meet people where they're at. Why? So that one day they can grow, they can rise, and they can do the same. I think the mature person is the one that meets people where they're at. The mature person doesn't stand on the top and say, hey, you better get up here. I mean, if you can't meet my level, that sucks for you. I think a true mature person actually meets people where they're at and pushes them up there and says, hey, we're going up there. And it's not going to feel good in the moment for the person you're pushing and the person who's pushing you to grow. But through that, I think the both of you grow and you move further. And with that, like you said, with modeling it, I think it's really important too, because when it comes to, especially us young people, I think a lot of times we're thinking, I want to preach a good message, or I want to teach a good message, or I want to say something good. But I think people aren't looking for something good. I think people are looking for the truth, something that's real. And I think a lot of times we think good, okay, if I check this, if I check that, if I can meet these doctrinal statements, I'm not saying doctrine's bad, but it's good to meet doctrine. It's good to be accurate. But at the end of the day, if people are hearing just a good message and they leave saying, wow, what a good message, and they walk and they go and do their life the same way, I think at that point, I think we're kind of missing the point. I think people need to be hearing and seeing that this is not only a good message, this is real, this is the truth. I cannot keep living this way. And I think modeling it has a big part in bringing out, hey, this is not just a good message, this is the truth. And I've seen that in your life. You've been changed by it. I need to be changed. I need God. And I see that it can happen because God has changed you. And I want to follow you as you follow Christ. So, yeah, I think you guys gave really good wisdom on that.
yeah, and I would even say, like, when you model humility to someone else, it's not only the fact that, oh, you're modeling humility to teach them, but when you're actually modeling humility and walking in humility, you will learn from these people. Our OGs, right? Like, we want to teach them so many things, right? Because they're doing a lot of things that may not be biblical or correct. But when we model humility, we get to see that, man, dude, I'm actually learning a lot from them, And that's where God works. And that's where God helps us do ministry so much better, is when we model humility, walk in humility, thinking instead of us teaching them, to really learn from them. I think that will definitely change your dynamics in ministry. And so that's why I think it's just so important to walk in humility, not just to teach others, but for them to also teach you in a way where you don't expect it, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's why relational ministry is so important, that you're actually doing life with them, and you're not just preaching. I think oftentimes as, young ministers, even myself, You know, we want the spotlight, we want the pulpit, right? And you know, you got to be very careful what you ask for, you know, because that's a pretty big burden to carry, you know. And sometimes I don't even know if we know what we're asking for. And so whenever I come across people that just want the spotlight, it's for me it's a red flag, you know, because it doesn't show humility. You know, I look for people in the background, kind of like what Sifri Andrew was saying, people who are doing life, people who are in the background serving, right, chopping up meat, chopping up veggies, cleaning the toilets. You know, those are all signs of humility. Those are things that I look forward to in someone to disciple. Like, I think this person might be a good leader, great leader one day, right? Because they're doing all the background stuff. They don't just want to be seen. And I think that's the danger that so many of us fall into is we want to be seen. We want to make ministry all about us. I want the spotlight. I want to preach a good message. I want people to like me. It's like, dude, ministry ain't about you. You know, and oftentimes the reason why we have so many issues in our churches, you know, coming from personal experience, we make ministry too much about us. This is what I want. This is my pay that I desire. This is about me, right? And we forget to really love on the people. And so, yeah, you just gotta be humble. Humility is so important, dude. Your character speaks volume. You know, you could preach a good message all you want, but if people are like, I don't feel loved by this guy, I don't even know who he is, I don't know. You know, it'd be really tough.
Yeah. I mean, with that being said, all these things, like, or at least for me, like, it's a lot easier said than done, you know? I'm not saying that, like, this is something easy to do. It is definitely not easy, especially being like a guy. For me, it was so hard. But I promise you, when you walk in humility and you just allow God to destroy your walls and to really humble you, your ministry, or you will enjoy ministry a lot more. Not saying it's going to be easier, but you'll begin to see God working in so many ways. But yeah, it's definitely a lot easier said than done. But this is why we have to have brother pastors keeping us accountable. Like being at Tekoa, if I didn't have my brothers there to keep me accountable, I don't think I would have walked out of Tekoa who I am today. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Any last thoughts on that question or any other advice you'd want to give?
None that comes to mind.
All right. Well, I'll give a quick recap of today's episode, and then I'll give a brief overview of the next episode that we'll be transitioning into. And then, yeah, that'll be pretty much it. To stay tuned for the next episode. So for today, overall, we pretty much touched base upon the struggles of the carnival within the local church and how to press on, or I guess some advice on pressing on beyond it. Or I guess, in other words, persevering through the struggles of the carnival within the local church. And I think Siva Tim and Siva Andrew has given some really good wisdom on this. Some of it being patient, being humble, trusting in God's way rather than our way. Because at the end of the day, it's His church, right? He sustains it. He saved the church. It's His bride, and no matter what, I mean, we're just there. We're under shepherds, like Siva Tim said, for the time being. So really good wisdom here. And with that, I think transitioning into the next episode will be advice or encouragement on transitioning from a Hmong dominant culture church to a kingdom culture church. I think it's actually a really good episode because Sifu Cha Zhong and Sifu Andrew are currently helping Cornerstone Alliance Church transition. And we are just in the beginning stages of it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and insight that they can give on that area. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. Hopefully you're encouraged. I hope you don't feel less discouraged than you did before. And I'm hoping that you feel hopeful and that you can persevere in the midst of your situation. Because at the end of the day, the reason why everything is difficult is because we are all sinful, and all of the heartache that we're feeling, it's the aching and longing for eternity. So there's a reason why it doesn't feel right yet. It's because it's God has not brought heaven yet. So we have to persevere through it. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Sifa Tim, Sifa Andrew, or feel free to message me as well. And that'll be it. Yeah. So thank you for listening to Cultivating Kingdom Culture.